The blood on her dress had long since dried to a rust-brown stain, but Clara Montgomery still couldn't stop shaking as she stumbled into the dusty town of Redemption, Texas, on that scorching afternoon in June of 1878. She had walked for 2 days straight after escaping the stagecoach robbery that had left the driver dead and her traveling companion wounded, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but it was the terror lodged in her chest that hurt most of all. When she finally collapsed outside the general store, drawing concerned looks from passers-by, she didn't see the tall cowboy watching from across the street, his weathered face creasing with concern as he noticed the way she flinched when a merchant nearby shouted at his helper. James Thornton had seen that kind of fear before. At 26 years old, he had worked cattle drives from Montana to Texas, had dealt with rustlers and stampedes and every kind of danger the frontier could throw at a man, but nothing unsettled him quite like seeing genuine terror in someone's eyes. He crossed the street with measured steps, careful not to approach too quickly, and when he reached the young woman crumpled on the boardwalk, he crouched down slowly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Miss, you look like you could use some help," he said, keeping his hands visible and his movements gentle. "There's a doctor just down the street, and Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house makes the best chicken soup in 3 counties. Would you let me help you get there?" Clara's green eyes snapped up to meet his, wide with alarm, her whole body tensing as if preparing to run despite her obvious exhaustion. But something in his calm demeanor, in the gentleness of his low voice, made her pause. She studied his face, taking in the honest brown eyes, the sun-weathered skin, the patient way he waited for her response without crowding her or demanding anything. "I don't have much money," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and crying. "That's all right," James replied, still speaking softly. "Let's just get you somewhere safe first. We can worry about everything else later." He stood slowly and offered his hand, palm up, giving her the choice. After a long moment of hesitation, Clara placed her trembling fingers in his calloused palm and let him help her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow, gentle as if handling something precious and fragile. The boarding house was cool and dim inside, a welcome relief from the brutal Texas sun. Mrs. Patterson, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour on her apron, took one look at Clara and immediately ushered her toward the back room. "Land's sakes, child, you look half dead," she said, her voice full of motherly concern. "James Thornton, you go fetch Doc Morrison right now. I'll get this poor girl cleaned up and fed." Over the next few days, as Clara recovered her strength under Mrs. Patterson's watchful care, James found himself making excuses to stop by the boarding house. He would bring fresh eggs from the ranch where he worked, or offer to fix a loose board on the porch, anything to check on the mysterious young woman who had arrived in Redemption looking like she had seen hell itself. He always spoke to her in that same gentle, quiet voice, never raising it even when talking about ordinary things like the weather or the cattle he worked with at the Double R Ranch, Clara noticed. She noticed everything about James Thornton, from the way he removed his hat before entering a room to the careful way he moved around her, never approaching too quickly or standing too close. She had been in Redemption for nearly a week before she finally told him her story, the words tumbling out one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said quietly, her hands twisted in her lap. "Thomas Montgomery. He was a banker in St. Louis, and everyone thought we were the perfect couple, but behind closed doors he was a different man entirely." She drew in a shaky breath, and James stayed perfectly still, listening without interrupting. He had a terrible temper. If dinner wasn't exactly how he liked it, or if I spoke to another man in public, or if I did anything he considered improper, he would rage at me. He never struck me, but his voice, the way he would shout and throw things and make me feel so small and worthless, it was like being beaten with words instead of fists. "I'm sorry," James said softly, and the genuine compassion in those two simple words made Clara's eyes fill with tears. "When he died of a sudden fever, I thought I was free," she continued. "But his brother Martin came to settle the estate. He was even worse than Thomas had been. He decided that as the widow I should become his responsibility, his wife. When I refused, he became violent. I managed to escape with just the clothes on my back and what little money I had hidden away. I was trying to reach my aunt in San Antonio when the stagecoach was robbed." She finally looked up at James, her eyes haunted. "The bandits killed the driver when he tried to fight back. They shot him, and he fell right at my feet. I ran while they were distracted with the strongbox, just ran into the wilderness and kept running until I found this town." James was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was still soft, still careful. "You're safe here," he said. "Martin Montgomery has no power in redemption, and if he does come looking for you, he'll have to go through me and every other decent man in this town. You have my word on that." Something shifted in Clara's chest at his promise, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Over the following weeks, as she began to heal both physically and emotionally, she found herself looking forward to James's daily visits. He would arrive each evening after his work at the ranch was done, smelling of leather and horses and the wide-open prairie, and they would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Kentucky, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16 and heading west to make his own way. He spoke of the beauty of the frontier, of watching storms roll across the plains and seeing wild horses run free. And he painted such vivid pictures with his words that Clara began to see Texas not as the harsh, frightening place she had first encountered, but as a land of possibility. In return, Clara began to share more of herself, the woman she had been before Thomas Montgomery had tried to crush her spirit. She told James about her love of books, how she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. She described her childhood in Boston, the garden her mother had kept, the way the ocean had looked on clear summer days. And James listened to every word as if it was precious, never interrupting, never dismissing her thoughts or feelings as unimportant. It was during one of these evening conversations, about 3 weeks after Clara's arrival in Redemption, that James first reached out and took her hand. The gesture was slow and tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Clara found herself threading her fingers through his instead. They sat like that in the gathering dusk, not speaking, just being together, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "I need to tell you something," James said quietly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I've been thinking about you near about every moment of every day since I first saw you. I know you've been through terrible things, and I know you probably need time to heal before you even think about such matters, but I want you to know that I care for you, Clara, deeply. And I'll wait however long it takes if there's any chance you might someday feel the same." Clara's heart hammered in her chest, but for once, it wasn't from fear. She looked at this kind, patient man who had shown her nothing but gentleness and respect, and she realized with startling clarity that she did feel the same. Perhaps she had from the very beginning, from that first moment when he had crouched beside her on the dusty boardwalk and spoken to her with such care. "I do feel the same," she whispered. "You've helped me remember that not all men are cruel, that kindness exists in this world. I was so broken when I came here, James, but you've helped put some of those pieces back together." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger somehow, and Clara found herself smiling back. "Can I court you properly?" he asked. "I'd like to do this right, show you off to the whole town, and let everyone know that you're spoken for if you'll have me." "I'd like that very much," Clara replied, and when James leaned in slowly, telegraphing his intentions clearly, she met him halfway in a kiss that was sweet and gentle and full of promise. Their courtship became the talk of redemption over the following months. James took Clara on buggy rides through the countryside, showing her the vast Texas landscape that he loved so much. They attended church socials together, and Clara began to make friends among the town's women, particularly Sarah Chen, the Chinese laundress who had faced her own share of prejudice and hardship in the frontier town. Clara also grew close to Mrs. Patterson, who had become something of a mother figure to her, and to young Emma Rodriguez, the 15-year-old daughter of the town's blacksmith, whom Clara began tutoring in reading and arithmetic. Throughout it all, James remained unfailingly gentle and patient. He never raised his voice, not even when a spooked horse nearly kicked him or when a ranch hand's carelessness led to a broken fence and scattered cattle. Clara watched him handle every situation with calm competence, his voice staying level and measured even when giving orders or expressing displeasure. It made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before, this certainty that he would never use his voice as a weapon against her. One evening in late September, as the brutal Texas summer was finally giving way to cooler autumn temperatures, they were sitting by the creek that ran along the edge of town when Clara brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "I want to teach," she said, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. "I've been helping Emma with her lessons, and it reminded me of how much I used to dream about having a classroom of my own. Do you think anyone would hire me, a widow with no formal training?" "I think you'd make a wonderful teacher," James replied softly. "And as it happens, the town council has been discussing the need for a proper schoolhouse. Right now, the few children who get any education at all are taught by whoever has time, usually the preacher's wife. But she's getting on in years and has said she can't manage it much longer. You should talk to Mayor Hendricks about it." Clara did just that, and within a week, she had been offered the position of Redemption's first official schoolteacher, with classes to begin after the harvest season ended in late October. The town would build a small schoolhouse, and Clara would receive a modest salary plus room and board. The news filled her with a joy and sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years, and when she threw her arms around James in celebration, he laughed and spun her around, his happiness at her success evident in every line of his face. But their happiness was interrupted in early October when a stranger rode into town asking questions about a young widow from St. Louis. The man claimed to be working for Martin Montgomery, who was searching for his brother's widow to settle some remaining estate business. Sheriff Tom Hargrove, a gruff but fair-minded lawman in his 50s, came to the boarding house to warn Clara, and James was there within minutes of hearing the news. "He can't make you go back," James said firmly, though his voice remained quiet even in his conviction. "You're a free woman and you have rights. Martin Montgomery might have been powerful in St. Louis, but he has no authority here." "I'm frightened," Clara admitted, hating the tremor in her voice. "What if he doesn't stop? What if he comes here himself or sends more men?" "I can't go back to that life, James. I would rather die." "That's not going to happen," James said, taking both her hands in his. "I won't let it. We won't let it. This whole town has come to care for you these past months, Clara. You're one of us now, and we protect our own." He was right. When Martin Montgomery himself arrived in Redemption 3 days later with 2 hired guns at his side, he found the entire town united against him. Mayor Hendricks, Sheriff Hargrove, James, and a dozen other men met Montgomery in front of the saloon, and the message was clear. Clara Montgomery was under their protection, and she had no interest in returning to St. Louis or having anything to do with her late husband's family. Montgomery was a tall, imposing man with cold eyes and an air of barely restrained fury. "That woman is family," he said, his voice rising with each word. "She has obligations, property matters to settle. You frontier simpletons have no right to keep her here against her will." "She's not being kept here," Sheriff Hargrove replied calmly. "She's choosing to stay. And unless you have legal documents that say otherwise, documents signed by a proper judge, you have no claim on her whatsoever. Texas law is clear on that point." "This is absurd," Montgomery snarled. Clara. I know you can hear me. Get out here and stop hiding behind these cowboys like a coward. Clara was indeed nearby, watching from the window of the boarding house with Mrs. Patterson beside her. When she heard Martin shouting her name, she felt her whole body start to shake, the old fear rising up to choke her. But then she felt Mrs. Patterson's comforting hand on her shoulder, and she heard James's voice, still calm and measured despite the tense situation. You need to lower your voice, Montgomery, James said quietly. And you need to leave. You're not welcome here, and Clara has made her wishes clear. She doesn't want to see you or speak to you. Now you can ride out of town peacefully, or the sheriff can escort you to the county line. Your choice. The confrontation might have turned violent if not for the sheer number of townspeople who had gathered, all of them clearly on Clara's side. Montgomery realized he was outmatched and outmaneuvered, and with a final string of threats and curses, he and his hired guns mounted their horses and rode out of Redemption. Sheriff Hargrove sent a wire to the county marshal just to be safe, explaining the situation and requesting that any future attempts by Montgomery to harass Clara Montgomery be blocked, and he received confirmation that the matter would be handled appropriately. That evening, as Clara sat on the porch with James, she felt something inside her finally break free, like a cage door opening to let a captive bird take flight. I was so afraid, she said softly. When I heard him shouting, it was like being back in that house in St. Louis, feeling small and powerless and trapped. But then I realized something. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not alone and helpless. I have friends here, people who care about me and who stood up for me when I needed them most. You were never helpless, James said gently. You survived things that would have broken a lesser person, and you had the courage to run when you needed to save yourself. All we did today was make it clear that you have people on your side now. Clara turned to look at him, this man who had been her shelter in the storm, her safe harbor in a frightening world. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now, naturally. I didn't think I would ever be able to trust a man again, let alone love one, but you've shown me what real strength looks like. It's not about raising your voice or forcing others to bend to your will. It's about being steady and kind and true, even when things are difficult. I love you too, James replied, his voice full of emotion despite its quietness. More than I ever thought possible. Clara Montgomery, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise I will spend every day of my life making sure you feel safe and cherished and free to be exactly who you are. Through happy tears, Clara said yes, and James kissed her there on the porch as the stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town church, with what seemed like every resident of Redemption in attendance. Clara wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson and Sarah Chen had sewn together, a beautiful creation in pale blue with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. James wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven, and when he said his vows in that same soft, gentle voice that had first made Clara feel safe, there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a cozy 2-room cabin that James had been fixing up for weeks in preparation. It had a good roof, sturdy walls, and a fireplace that would keep them warm when winter came. Clara set about making it a home, hanging curtains and arranging the simple furniture, and James built her a bookshelf for the small collection of books she had begun to acquire. The schoolhouse was finished in early November, and Clara began teaching a class of 12 children ranging in age from 6 to 14, including young Emma Rodriguez, who proved to be a brilliant student with a particular gift for mathematics. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. James would rise before dawn to ride out to the Double R Ranch, where he worked as the foreman overseeing the ranch hands and the large herd of cattle. Clara would prepare breakfast, then head to the schoolhouse to teach her students. In the evenings, they would have dinner together and talk about their days, and sometimes James would read aloud to Clara from the newspaper or a book while she worked on her sewing. On Sundays, they would attend church and then visit with friends, often sharing a meal with Mrs. Patterson or the Rodriguez family. It was a simple life, but it was filled with a contentment that Clara had never known existed. She thrived as a teacher, finding joy in watching her students learn and grow. She became an integral part of the community, organizing a ladies' reading circle and helping Sarah Chen advocate for better treatment of the Chinese workers who had helped build the railroad line that now connected Redemption to larger cities. And through it all, James was her steady anchor, her loving partner who continued to speak to her with that same gentle care that had first captured her heart. Winter in Texas was milder than what Clara had known in Boston or St. Louis, but there were still cold days and the occasional frost. On one particularly chilly evening in January of 1879, as they sat by the fire with Clara nestled against James's side, she told him the news she had been holding close for the past week. "I'm going to have a baby," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Doc Morrison confirmed it this morning. He thinks the baby will come sometime in late summer." James's face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, that's wonderful. Are you happy about it? I know this wasn't planned." "I'm very happy," Clara assured him. "A little nervous, but happy. I never thought I would want to be a mother after everything that happened with Thomas, but this is different. This baby was made from love, and it will be born into a home full of kindness and safety. That makes all the difference." They spent the evening making plans, discussing names and how they would arrange the small house to accommodate a nursery. James was attentive throughout Clara's pregnancy, always careful to help her with anything too strenuous and making sure she rested when she needed to. The whole town seemed to share in their excitement, with the women showering Clara with gifts and advice, and even the rough cowboys at the ranch offering James their congratulations and good-natured ribbing about sleepless nights and dirty diapers. Clara taught school right up until a week before the baby came, determined to finish out the spring term so her students would be prepared for the next year. On a hot August evening in 1879, after 12 hours of labor attended by Doc Morrison and Mrs. Patterson, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel Thomas Thornton, the middle name chosen to honor the memory of Clara's father rather than her late husband. Daniel had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment James held his son for the first time, speaking to him in that same soft, gentle voice, Clara knew their little family was complete. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James would come home from the ranch and immediately take over baby duty, walking Daniel around the small house and singing to him in a low, soothing voice when he was fussy. Clara marveled at how natural he was with their son, how patient and tender. She had worried, in the dark corners of her mind, that she might not know how to be a good mother given her own traumatic experiences. But those fears proved unfounded. She discovered reserves of love and strength she hadn't known she possessed, and watching James with their child only deepened her love for her husband. Clara returned to teaching when Daniel was 6 months old, with Mrs. Patterson happily agreeing to watch the baby during school hours. The arrangement worked beautifully, and life continued its pleasant rhythm. Daniel grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler who loved to follow his father around and tried to help with every task, no matter how unsuitable for small hands. By his second birthday, it was clear he had inherited his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament. In the spring of 1882, when Daniel was approaching his third birthday, James came home one evening with news that would change their lives again. "The owner of the Double R is looking to retire," he told Clara as they sat on the porch watching Daniel play with his wooden horse. "He's offered to sell me a section of the ranch land at a fair price, along with 100 head of cattle to start my own herd. It would mean taking on debt and working even harder than I do now, but it would be ours, Clara. Our own ranch, our own future. Clara didn't hesitate. We should do it, she said firmly. You've worked for someone else long enough, James. It's time to build something for ourselves, for Daniel and any other children we might have. The knowing look in her eyes made James pause. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that Daniel is going to be a big brother come fall, Clara replied with a smile. And this baby is going to be born into a family that owns its own land, if we're brave enough to take this chance. They were. With a loan from the bank and their own savings, James purchased 200 acres of good grazing land and the starter herd. It was hard work, harder than anything either of them had done before, but they threw themselves into it with determination. James hired 2 ranch hands to help with the daily work, and Clara continued teaching while also managing the household accounts and helping with the ranch paperwork. Their second son, Matthew James Thornton, was born in October of 1882, and he proved to be as healthy and strong as his older brother. The Thornton Ranch, as they called it, slowly grew and prospered. James proved to be as skilled at running his own operation as he had been at managing someone else's, and his reputation for fair dealing and honest work brought him steady business. Clara eventually had to give up teaching as the demands of the ranch and 2 young sons became too much to manage, but she found satisfaction in her new role and in watching her family thrive. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Daniel and Matthew grew into fine young boys, learning to ride almost before they could walk properly, and helping with age-appropriate ranch chores from an early age. In 1885, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after Clara's mother, and because she was born in the spring when the wild roses were blooming across the prairie. Sarah was a spirited child with her father's brown eyes and her mother's quick mind, and she had both her brothers wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Life on the ranch was good, but not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources, harsh winters that took a toll on the livestock, and the ever-present dangers of frontier life. But through it all, James and Clara faced everything together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with each passing year. James never raised his voice, not even when the cattle market crashed in 1887 and they nearly lost everything, not even when a rattlesnake spooked his horse and left him with a broken arm that took months to heal properly. His calm, steady presence was the rock upon which their family was built, and Clara thanked God every day for the blessing of having such a man as her husband. The children grew up knowing they were loved and safe, never hearing the kind of angry shouting and harsh words that had marked Clara's first marriage. James taught his sons to be strong but gentle, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life, and to never use their size or voice to intimidate others. He taught Sarah that she was every bit as capable as her brothers, and that being a woman didn't mean she had to accept anything less than respect and kindness from the men in her life. Clara reinforced these lessons, and together they raised children who were confident and compassionate, who knew the value of hard work, but also the importance of tenderness. By the spring of 1895, the Thornton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the county. Daniel, now 15, was already helping his father run the daily operations, and Matthew, at 13, showed promise as a natural horseman who could gentle even the most difficult horses. Sarah, at 10, was the bookkeeper of the family, keeping track of accounts with a precision that impressed even the bank manager in town. The original 2-room cabin had been expanded and rebuilt into a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building. One evening in early June, as James and Clara sat on that porch watching the sun set over their land, Clara reflected on the 17 years that had passed since she had stumbled into redemption broken and terrified. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing to the ranch to the house, to their children visible in the distance playing near the barn. When you first saw me collapsed on that boardwalk, did you have any idea we would end up here? James considered the question, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. I didn't know the specifics, he said softly. But I knew from that first moment that you were someone special, someone worth knowing. And I knew that I wanted to help you, to see you smile again. Everything else, all of this, it just grew from that first moment of connection. You saved me, Clara said simply. Not just that day, but every day since. You showed me that I could trust again, that I could love again. You gave me back myself, James. You saved me too, James replied. I was just going through the motions before you came along, working and existing but not really living. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You and our children, you're everything that matters. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night around them. From inside the house came the sound of their children laughing at something, and Clara smiled at the sound. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not the absence of challenges or hardship, but the presence of love and safety and belonging. The years continued to roll by, bringing more changes and growth. Daniel married a kind young woman named Elizabeth Foster in 1898, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, starting their own family while Daniel worked as his father's partner in running the operation. Matthew, after years of working with horses, started a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Texas for producing strong, reliable animals. Sarah, displaying her mother's love of learning, insisted on attending the new teachers' college that had opened in Austin, and returned to Redemption in 1902 to take over as the head teacher at the school her mother had once run. James and Clara aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver but their love remaining as strong as ever. By 1905, they had 7 grandchildren with more on the way, and the Thornton Ranch had grown to encompass over 1,000 acres of prime land. They had built something lasting, a legacy of love and hard work that would continue for generations. On their 25th wedding anniversary in November of 1903, the whole family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. Their children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and neighbors and friends from town came to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. Sheriff Hargrove, now retired and in his 70s, made a toast praising James and Clara for their contributions to Redemption and for being examples of what a good marriage should look like. Mrs. Patterson, who still lived in the boarding house though she was now in her 80s, tearfully recalled the day a broken young woman had arrived in town and how blessed she had been to watch Clara heal and thrive. As the party wound down and the guests departed, James and Clara found themselves alone on the porch once more, watching the stars as they had done countless times over the years. 25 years, Clara mused. Half my lifetime and all the best parts of it. The best parts of mine too, James agreed, his voice still soft and gentle after all these years. Every single day with you has been a gift, Clara. Even the hard days, the struggles and losses, they were worth it because we faced them together. I used to think I would never recover from what Thomas did to me, Clara said quietly. I thought that part of me that could trust and love was broken beyond repair, but you were so patient with me, James. You gave me the space and time I needed to heal, and you showed me through your actions that not all men are cruel or harsh. You taught me that real strength is quiet and steady, that a gentle voice can be more powerful than a shout. You taught me things too, James replied. You taught me that love isn't about possession or control. It's about partnership, about lifting each other up and celebrating each other's successes. Watching you grow from that frightened woman into the strong, confident person you are now has been the greatest privilege of my life. They kissed there under the stars, a sweet, gentle kiss full of 25 years of shared history and love, and Clara felt her heart overflow with gratitude for this man, this life, this unexpected happiness that had grown from the ashes of her darkest days. The years continued their steady march forward. James and Clara watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated births and weddings, and mourned losses when old friends passed on. Mrs. Patterson died peacefully in her sleep in 1908 at the age of 87, and the whole town turned out for her funeral, recognizing the profound impact she had had on so many lives. Sheriff Hargrove followed her 2 years later, and Mayor Hendricks passed in 1912. Each loss was keenly felt, but the legacy these people had built in redemption lived on in the strong, thriving community they had helped create. By 1915, James and Clara were in their 60s, and while they had slowed down considerably, they were still active in ranch life and the community. James still rode out to check on the cattle most days, though Daniel and Matthew handled the majority of the physical work now. Clara had returned to teaching part-time, working with the youngest students at the school and sharing her decades of wisdom with Sarah, who had proven to be an even better teacher than her mother had been. They had 14 grandchildren now, ranging in age from infants to teenagers, and the ranch supported not just their immediate family, but also the families of the ranch hands who worked the land. The Thornton Ranch had become more than just a business. It was a community unto itself, a place where people were treated fairly and with respect, where hard work was valued but where family and faith came first. On a warm evening in May of 1918, as James and Clara sat on the porch watching yet another Texas sunset, Clara reached for James's hand and held it gently. "Do you remember what you promised me the day we met?" she asked. "You said you would help me get somewhere safe and that we could worry about everything else later." "I remember," James said softly, his thumb tracing familiar circles on the back of her hand just as he had done 40 years earlier. "You kept that promise," Clara said, her voice full of emotion. "Not just that day, but every day since. You made sure I always felt safe, that I always had a place to belong. You gave me a home, not just a house, but a true home built on love and gentleness and respect. And you gave me a family, these beautiful children and grandchildren who will carry on what we've built together." "It was my honor," James replied. "Loving you has been the easiest and most rewarding thing I've ever done. You took a chance on a simple cowboy who had nothing but his integrity and his determination to make you feel safe, and you built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, James and Clara sat together in perfect contentment, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. 40 years after a terrified young widow had stumbled into redemption, and a kind cowboy had spoken to her with a gentle voice, they were still together, still in love, still building their legacy of compassion and strength. The house behind them was full of family preparing dinner, their voices a cheerful backdrop to the quiet moment on the porch. Daniel and Elizabeth's oldest son, James II, was heading off to college in Austin in the fall, the first Thornton to pursue higher education. Matthew's horse breeding program had just received a commendation from the State Agricultural Society. Sarah's school had expanded to include advanced courses for older students, making it one of the finest rural schools in Texas. In that moment, as the evening breeze carried the scent of wild roses and fresh grass across the prairie, Clara understood that this was what happily ever after truly meant. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where all problems disappeared and life became perfect. It was this: two people who had chosen each other, who had worked together through good times and bad, who had built something meaningful and lasting through patience, respect, and unwavering love. "I love you," she whispered to James, the words as true and heartfelt as they had been the first time she had said them 4 decades ago. "I love you too," James replied in that same soft, gentle voice that had first made her feel safe, the voice that had never raised in anger or harshness, the voice that had been her constant comfort through 4 decades of marriage. Today, tomorrow, and always. And as their family called them in to dinner, as their children and grandchildren gathered around the long table in the dining room full of laughter and love, James and Clara Thornton walked into their home hand in hand, grateful beyond measure for the beautiful life they had built together, a life that had begun with a simple act of kindness and had blossomed into a love story that would be told in redemption for generations to come. Their legacy was not just the successful ranch or the school or the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward. Their true legacy was the example they had set. That gentleness is strength, that patience heals wounds, that love built on mutual respect and understanding can weather any storm. In a harsh frontier world that often valued toughness over tenderness, James and Clara Thornton had proven that the softest voice could carry the most power, and that the greatest courage was found not in violence, but in choosing kindness every single day. As the years continued to pass and they grew older together, that truth remained constant. James never raised his voice, not even as age weakened his body and made simple tasks more difficult. Clara never forgot the gift he had given her, the gift of safety and gentle love that had allowed her to heal and become the woman she was meant to be. And when they finally passed into rest, James in 1925 at the age of 73, and Clara following him just 6 months later at the age of 70, unable to imagine life without her beloved partner, they left behind a family and a community that embodied everything they had believed in and fought for. The Thornton Ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, and every child born into the family learned the story of how it all began, with a frightened woman, a gentle cowboy, and a soft voice that changed everything. It was a story of healing and hope, of second chances and enduring love, and it remained a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in how loudly we can shout, but in how gently we can speak.